Amara Johnson stares at the screen, her eyes wide as the view counter climbs past 10 million. The viral video captures her calm yet powerful response to a racist assault at 3,600 feet. What began as the worst flight of her life has transformed her into an unexpected voice for justice overnight. Before I dive into this incredible story, where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below. If this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button and join our community of people who care about real stories that matter. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. The morning sun filtered through the blinds of Amara Johnson's small Atlanta apartment as she meticulously packed her carry-on suitcase. Every item had been carefully selected for this trip, the most important journey of her 24 years. Her fingers trembled slightly as she zipped her portfolio, closed the leather case containing printed copies of her best articles from Howard University's newspaper, where she had graduated with honors in journalism just 8 months prior. "This is it," she whispered to herself, running her hands over the smooth navy blue blazer she had purchased specifically for tomorrow's interview. The prestigious Caldwell Media Group in New York had finally responded to her application after months of silence. One email had changed everything. "We'd like to meet you for a potential position covering social justice issues." Amara's phone buzzed with a text from Isaiah Taylor, her college friend who now worked as a production assistant at a smaller outlet in Manhattan. "You ready for tomorrow? They're going to love you," his message read. She smiled, typing back, "As ready as I'll ever be. Still can't believe they want to meet me. Believe it, your coverage of the Montgomery protest was brilliant. That's why I sent your portfolio to my contact there." Amara sat on the edge of her bed, her thoughts drifting to her mother, who had raised her single-handedly in a small house on the south side of Atlanta. Clara Johnson had worked double shifts as a nurse to put Amara through school, instilling in her daughter a sense of dignity that no amount of discrimination could erode. "You stand tall," her mother would say. "Your voice matters just as much as anyone else's." Those words had guided Amara through the microaggressions at school, the suspicious glances in stores, and the countless times she had to work twice as hard to be considered half as good. Looking at her bank account on her phone, Amara sighed. The flight had cost nearly half of her savings, and the hotel in New York would consume most of what remained. This interview wasn't just an opportunity. It was an investment in everything she had worked toward. Failure wasn't an option. After one final check of her documents, Amara wheeled her suitcase to the door. Her neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, had offered to drive her to the airport. Another small blessing in what Amara hoped would be a chain of many. 3 hours later, Amara found herself navigating the busy terminal of Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport. Her boarding pass indicated Seat 3B, a first-class seat she had splurged on to ensure she would arrive in New York rested and prepared. The upgrade had consumed the last of her discretionary budget, but appearing professional and alert for the interview trumped any temporary financial strain. Now, boarding first class for Delta Flight 1283 to New York LaGuardia, the announcement came through the speakers. Amara joined the short-line passport and boarding pass in hand. The gate agent smiled professionally as she scanned Amara's documents. "Enjoy your flight, Miss Johnson." On board, Amara located her window seat and settled in, placing her portfolio carefully under the seat in front of her. An elderly couple occupied the seats across the aisle, while a businessman in a crisp suit tapped away at his laptop 2 rows ahead. The aisle seat next to hers remained empty as the rest of the first-class cabin filled. She removed her interview notes from her bag, reviewing key talking points about her journalistic philosophy and her ideas for coverage of marginalized communities. The opportunity to report on social justice issues at a major media outlet was everything she had dreamed of since choosing journalism as her path. "Just be authentic," she reminded herself, highlighting a note about her coverage of voter suppression tactics in Georgia. Speak your truth." As the final boarding call was announced, Amara tucked her notes away and gazed out the window. New York waited on the horizon, and with it, the future she had worked so hard to create. The distinctive sound of expensive leather shoes clicking against the aircraft floor drew Amara's attention away from the window. Richard Whitman, though she didn't yet know his name, strode down the narrow aisle of the first-class cabin with the confidence of someone accustomed to occupying space unapologetically. At 58, his salt and pepper hair was meticulously styled, and his tailored charcoal suit probably cost more than Amara's entire wardrobe. "Sir, may I help you with your carry-on?" offered flight attendant Marcus Cooper, a tall man with a kind face and patient demeanor. "It's about time," Richard muttered, barely looking at Marcus as he thrust his designer briefcase toward him. "This flight is already delayed, and now I have to wait for basic service." The plane wasn't actually delayed. In fact, boarding was proceeding right on schedule. But Amara had encountered enough entitled passengers during her previous flights to recognize the type. "Of course, sir. My apologies for any inconvenience," Marcus responded, professionally stowing the briefcase in the overhead compartment. "You're in seat 3 amperes, right next to the window." Richard frowned, glancing at his boarding pass. "No, that's not right. I specifically requested an aisle seat when I was forced to book this commercial flight. My usual charter service is undergoing maintenance." "I'm sorry, sir, but 3 amperes is what we have assigned." "It's a window seat," next to Marcus paused, gesturing toward Amara. Richard's eyes narrowed slightly as they fell on Amara. She offered a polite smile which he did not return. Instead, he sighed dramatically. "Is this some kind of mistake I paid for first class?" he said, his voice loud enough for the surrounding passengers to hear. Darlene Williams, the lead flight attendant, approached with a practiced smile. "Good morning, sir. Is there an issue with your seat?" "Yes, there is. I requested an aisle seat and now I'm stuck by the window next to." He gestured vaguely in Amara's direction without finishing his sentence. "I understand your frustration, but the flight is completely full today," Darlene explained calmly. "I'd be happy to see if someone might be willing to switch, but—" "Forget it," Richard interrupted. "I'll just make do. But I want this noted for my frequent flyer account." He reluctantly took his seat next to Amara, making a show of adjusting himself in the confined space and sighing heavily. "Excuse me," Amara said politely. "Would you prefer to switch seats?" "I don't mind sitting by the window." Richard glanced at her briefly as if surprised she could form complete sentences. "No, I've already settled in. Just try to keep to your side, please." Amara pressed her lips together and returned her attention to the safety demonstration. She could feel tension radiating from the man beside her, but chose to focus on remaining calm. This flight was too important for her to let an uncomfortable seatmate ruin it. As the plane began taxiing, Richard pulled out his phone, ignoring the announcements, to switch all devices to airplane mode. Sir Darlene approached again. "I'll need you to put your phone on airplane mode or turn it off for takeoff." "I'm finishing an important call," he responded without looking up. "Just give me a minute." "I'm sorry, but FAA regulations require all." "Do you know who I am?" Richard finally looked up, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. "I'm Richard Whitman of Whitman Real Estate Development. We own property in 38 states. Darlene maintained her composure. "I understand, Mr. Whitman, but the FAA regulations apply to everyone on board. Your safety and the safety of all passengers is our priority." With obvious reluctance, Richard ended his call, muttering about power-tripping flight attendants, just loud enough for those nearby to hear. Amara shifted uncomfortably in her seat, trying to create as much space as possible between herself and the seething man. Once they reached cruising altitude, Richard immediately reclined his seat to its maximum position and spread his arms across both armrests, effectively claiming Amara's space. When the beverage service began, he ordered a scotch on the rocks, downing it quickly and requesting another before Darlene had even served the rest of the first-class cabin. And make sure it's a double this time, he called after her. Amara quietly requested water and returned to reviewing her notes. She could feel Richard's eyes occasionally darting toward her papers. "Journalism?" he asked abruptly, the word coming out almost like an accusation. Surprised by the sudden attention, Amara nodded. "Yes. I'm heading to New York for an interview tomorrow." He responded dismissively. "Let me guess. Another liberal arts graduate planning to write hit pieces on successful business people?" Amara took a deep breath. "Actually, I'm interested in social justice reporting, giving voice to underrepresented communities." Richard scoffed. "Of course you are." Before she could respond, his phone rang again. He had apparently turned it back on immediately after takeoff. He answered loudly, making no effort to keep his conversation private in the confined space. "Yeah, Tom, I'm on my way to the Richardson property now. It's in one of those transitioning neighborhoods." He emphasized the word with air quotes. Amara could see from her peripheral vision. "We'll clean it up, don't worry. Those people won't be able to afford the new rent once we're done with renovations. Natural displacement, all perfectly legal." Amara's jaw tightened as she realized he was talking about gentrification, likely pushing low-income Black and brown families out of their homes. She pulled out her journal and began making notes about the conversation, partly as a distraction and partly out of professional habit. Richard continued his call, occasionally using coded language that any person of color would recognize as thinly veiled racism. When he finally ended the call, he turned to find Amara writing in her journal. "What are you doing?" he demanded, trying to peer at her notes. "Just working on some ideas for my interview," she replied calmly, angling the journal away from his view. "Were you writing about me?" His voice rose slightly. "Were you recording what I was saying?" "This is my personal journal," Amara explained. "I always write down thoughts and observations when I travel." "Show me what you wrote," he demanded, reaching toward her journal. Amara pulled it closer to her chest. "I'm sorry, but this is private." Richard's face flushed. "You're spying on me, aren't you? Taking things out of context for some hit piece." Several nearby passengers had begun to notice the commotion. Amara kept her voice level, though her heart was racing. "Mr. Whitman, I'm not writing about you. I'm simply preparing for my interview tomorrow." He glared at her with obvious distrust before flagging down Darlene. "Excuse me, I need to use the restroom." As he stood, he deliberately bumped into Amara's shoulder, causing her to drop her pen. She watched him storm toward the lavatory, then exchanged a glance with Darlene, who approached with concern in her eyes. "Is everything all right, Miss Johnson?" she asked quietly. "He's being somewhat hostile," Amara admitted. "But I'll be fine. Just a few more hours to New York." What she didn't say was how familiar this kind of treatment felt. The assumptions, the entitlement, the thinly veiled contempt. As a Black woman in America, she had developed a thick skin out of necessity. But something about Richard Whitman's behavior suggested the situation might escalate before they reached their destination. The beverage cart made its second round through the cabin as the plane continued its journey toward New York. Darlene approached row 3 with practiced efficiency, her professional demeanor intact despite the earlier tension. "Would either of you care for another drink?" she asked, looking first at Amara, who politely declined, and then at Richard, who had returned from the lavatory with no improvement in his mood. "Another scotch," he demanded, "and make it a proper pour this time. The last one was practically empty." "Of course, sir," Darlene replied, maintaining her composure as she prepared his drink. When she handed it to him, Richard immediately took a large swallow and frowned. "This isn't the premium scotch I requested. I can taste the difference." "I apologize, Mr. Whitman, but we're serving our standard selection on this flight. If you'd like to see the options—" "Unbelievable," he interrupted. "I pay thousands for first class, and you can't even stock decent liquor. Standards everywhere are in free fall these days." His gaze shifted pointedly toward Amara, the implication of his statement hanging in the air between them. She kept her eyes fixed on her notebook, refusing to give him the satisfaction of a reaction. "If there's anything else I can do to make your flight more comfortable, please let me know," Darlene offered before moving on to the next row. Richard shifted in his seat, deliberately extending his elbow onto Amara's armrest again. "These seats keep getting smaller," he complained loudly. "They'll let anyone into first class these days if they can scrape together the fare." Amara continued making notes in her journal, documenting ideas for her interview while also almost unconsciously recording Richard's behavior. Writing had always been her refuge, her way of processing experiences, both good and bad. The plane hit a patch of turbulence, causing her pen to leave a jagged line across the page. As she steadied her hand, she noticed Richard staring at her journal. "You're still writing about me, aren't you?" he accused, his voice rising. "I knew it. You're one of those social justice warriors, looking for something to be offended by." Amara closed her journal calmly. "Mr. Whitman, with all due respect, not everything is about you. I'm preparing for an important interview tomorrow." "Let me see what you wrote then," he demanded, reaching toward her journal. Amara pulled it away. "This contains my private thoughts and professional notes. I'm not obligated to share it with you." "So you admit you're hiding something," he pressed, his face reddening. "This is exactly what's wrong with your generation. Always playing the victim. Always looking to take down successful people like me." Several passengers were now openly watching the exchange. An elderly woman across the aisle made eye contact with Amara, her expression concerned but hesitant to intervene. "I'm not trying to take anyone down," Amara responded evenly. "I'm simply asking for the same respect I'm showing you." "Respect?" Richard scoffed loud enough for the entire cabin to hear. "You want to talk about respect while you sit there writing your little hit piece? I've worked for everything I have. No one gave me handouts or special treatment because of my skin color." The cabin fell silent at his thinly veiled racist remark. Amara felt heat rising to her face, but maintained her composure, years of similar encounters having prepared her for precisely this moment. "I've also worked for everything I have," she replied, her voice steady, despite the anger and hurt bubbling beneath the surface. "I earned my scholarship to Howard University through academic excellence. I graduated at the top of my class while working part-time to support myself. And I secured this interview through the quality of my journalism, not through any special treatment." Richard's expression darkened. "Howard, huh? One of those historically black colleges. That explains a lot." Amara took a deep breath. Howard University is one of the most prestigious institutions in the country, with alumni including Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall and Nobel laureate Toni Morrison. "Listen, I don't need a history lesson from you," Richard snapped. "Just stop writing about me in your little notebook." "As I've already explained, I'm not." Richard suddenly stood up, bumping the armrest and causing his empty glass to topple over. "I need to use the restroom again." As he squeezed past Amara, he deliberately knocked into her knees, causing her to drop her journal. When she bent to retrieve it, he stepped on the corner of the book before continuing down the aisle. Darlene, who had witnessed the interaction from nearby, approached Amara. "Are you all right, Miss Johnson? Would you like me to see if we can find you another seat?" "I doubt there are any available," Amara replied, smoothing the crumpled page of her journal. "But thank you. I'll be fine." "His behavior is unacceptable," Darlene whispered. "I've made note of the situation. If it continues to escalate, we have protocols in place." Amara nodded gratefully, then noticed Richard returning from the bathroom. His expression darkened when he saw her speaking with the flight attendant. "Now you're complaining about me," he demanded as he approached. "Typical. Can't handle a simple conversation without running to authority figures." Darlene stepped forward. "Sir, I was just checking if Miss Johnson needed anything. Standard customer service." "I'm sure you were," Richard replied sarcastically. "I've noticed how quickly you respond to her requests while making me wait." "That's not true at all, sir," Darlene responded professionally. "We strive to provide excellent service to all our passengers." "Save it," Richard snapped, squeezing back into his seat. Just make sure you note in your report that I'm the one being harassed here. She's been writing about me, probably planning some social media smear campaign." Amara shook her head slightly at Darlene, indicating she didn't want to escalate the situation further. The flight attendant nodded in understanding and moved away, but not before saying, "I'll be right nearby if you need anything." Richard glared at Amara. "You think you're so clever, don't you? Getting the staff on your side with your victim act." Amara turned to face him directly for the first time. "Mr. Whitman, I have not victimized you in any way. I have been polite and respectful despite your behavior. All I want is to complete this flight peacefully so I can focus on my interview tomorrow." "Oh, there it is," he sneered, playing the race card. "I knew it would come eventually." "I haven't mentioned race at all," Amara pointed out calmly. "You're the only one who's brought it up." Several passengers had begun recording the interaction discreetly on their phones, including a teenage girl named Taylor Reynolds in the row behind them, who had captured the entire exchange with perfect clarity. As tension filled the air of the first-class cabin, Amara wondered how the next 2 hours of this flight would unfold, unaware that in just minutes, her life would change forever. The tension in row 3 had become a spectacle for the entire first-class cabin. Passengers exchanged uncomfortable glances as Richard Whitman's voice grew increasingly agitated. Amara Johnson maintained her composure, though her knuckles had turned white from gripping her journal so tightly. "I see what you're doing," Richard hissed, leaning closer to Amara. "Trying to make me look like the bad guy. I've dealt with people like you before." "Mr. Whitman, I'm not trying to make anyone look like anything," Amara replied quietly. "I just want to finish this flight in peace." When Darlene approached with a coffee service, Richard's attention snapped toward her. Finally, he said, "I've been waiting for my coffee for 20 minutes. "My apologies for the wait, sir," Darlene responded, pouring him a cup of steaming black coffee. "Would you like cream or sugar?" "Black is fine," he muttered, taking the cup without thanking her. Darlene turned to Amara. "Coffee, Miss Johnson?" "Yes, please." "With cream, thank you." As Darlene carefully handed Amara her coffee, Richard's eyes narrowed at the interaction. "Notice how she called you Miss Johnson. Very formal. Very respectful," he said, after Darlene moved on. "Yet I'm just sir, not Mr. Whitman. Interesting, isn't it?" Amara sipped her coffee silently, choosing not to engage with his baseless accusation. Her interview notes were spread across her tray table, and she returned her attention to them, hoping Richard would take the hint. He didn't. "I saw you complaining to her earlier," Richard continued, his voice rising. "What exactly did you tell her about me? That I'm being racist for daring to question why you're writing about me?" A middle-aged man across the aisle glanced over with concern but said nothing. The elderly woman who had made eye contact with Amara earlier was now watching intently, her brow furrowed. "I didn't say anything about you," Amara explained patiently. "She was checking if I wanted to change seats, and I declined." "Change seats?" Richard's face flushed deep red. "So now I'm too offensive to sit next to." This is exactly the problem with America today. Successful white men can't even speak their minds without being labeled and targeted. Amara took a deep breath, set her coffee down, and turned to face Richard directly. "Mr. Whitman, no one is targeting you. No one has labeled you anything. The only person who has mentioned race in this entire exchange is you." "Because I know exactly what's happening here," he shouted loud enough for everyone in first class and several rows into economy to hear. "You're waiting for me to say something you can twist and use against me. You're recording me or writing down my words to take them out of context for your little social justice crusade." The plane had gone completely silent except for Richard's voice. Marcus, the male flight attendant, had started moving toward them from the galley, concern evident on his face. "You're all the same. Richard continued, gesturing wildly. Always playing the race card, always claiming to be victims, when you're actually the ones attacking decent, hardworking Americans like me. Sir, I need you to lower your voice, Marcus interjected as he reached their row. Stay out of this. Richard snapped at him before turning back to Amara. She's been harassing me this entire flight, writing about me in her notebook, and now she's got the flight attendants involved in her little scheme. That's not true, Amara said firmly, looking up at Marcus. I've been reviewing notes for a job interview. Lear Richard shouted, slamming his hand down on his tray table, causing his coffee cup to rattle precariously. Show them what you wrote. Show everyone what you've been writing about me. Sir, I need you to calm down immediately, Marcus said, his voice authoritative but calm. You're disturbing the other passengers. I'm disturbing them, Richard laughed bitterly. She's the one who started this whole thing with her little notebook and her whispers to the staff. Darlene had appeared beside Marcus now. Sir, this is your final warning. If you cannot control yourself, the captain will be notified and will be forced to take further action. Richard glared at them both, then at Amara, who remained composed despite the scene unfolding around her. Something in her calmness seemed to enrage him further. You think you're so superior, don't you? He seethed, sitting there all calm and collected while you destroy a man's reputation. This is what's wrong with your generation. No respect for achievement, no understanding of how the real world works. Amara opened her mouth to respond, but before she could form a word, Richard made a sudden, deliberate movement. In one fluid motion, he picked up his coffee cup and poured the hot liquid directly onto Amara's lap, the dark liquid splashing across her cream-colored pants and spreading to her pristine white blouse. Some of it splattered onto her portfolio, immediately staining the important document she had prepared for her interview. Gasps erupted throughout the cabin. Amara froze in shock, the hot liquid burning through the fabric to her skin. The pain was immediate and intense, but it was the deliberateness of the act, the sheer malice behind it, that stunned her into momentary silence. Oh, I'm so sorry, Richard said, his voice dripping with false sincerity. It was an accident. The turbulence, you know. The plane was flying smooth as glass. That was no accident, called out the elderly woman across the aisle, finding her voice at last. I saw him do it on purpose. Several other passengers nodded in agreement, many now openly recording with their phones. Taylor Reynolds, the 17-year-old in the row behind, had captured the entire incident in perfect clarity, her phone steady and focused. Darlene rushed to Amara with napkins, while Marcus firmly gripped Richard's shoulder. Sir, I need you to come with me right now, Marcus said, his voice leaving no room for argument. Take your hands off me, Richard hissed. Do you know who I am? Yes, Mr. Whitman, we're well aware of who you are, Marcus replied, signaling to another flight attendant. The captain has been notified and will be diverting to Philadelphia International Airport, where authorities will be waiting. Authorities, Richard sputtered. For an accident, this is ridiculous. She's been provoking me this entire flight. Meanwhile, Darlene was helping Amara to her feet. Let's get you to the lavatory to clean up. I have a first aid kit for the burns. Amara stood shakily, coffee dripping from her clothes. Her carefully selected interview outfit was ruined, her skin stinging from the hot liquid. Worst of all, her portfolio, containing all her work samples and prepared notes for tomorrow, was soaked through with coffee, the ink already beginning to run on several pages. As Darlene guided her toward the bathroom, Amara could hear Richard continuing to proclaim his innocence, insisting that he was the real victim. The other passengers watched in stunned silence, the gravity of what they had just witnessed settling over the cabin. What would you have done in Amara's situation? Comment 1 if you think she should confront Richard directly, or 2 if you believe she should let the airline handle it. How would you react if someone deliberately poured coffee on you during a flight, like this video? If you believe airlines should have stricter policies against passenger harassment, and subscribe to see what happens next in this incredible, true story. The way Amara responds in the next few minutes will shock everyone on that plane and millions around the world. But how would you handle such a blatant act of racism and assault at 36,000 feet? In the cramped airplane lavatory, Amara winced as Darlene gently applied burn ointment to her reddened skin. The coffee had soaked through her clothes, leaving angry red patches on her thighs and stomach. "These don't look like third-degree burns," thankfully Darlene said, her voice gentle but professional. "But they're going to be painful for a few days." Amara nodded silently, still processing what had just happened. She had experienced racism throughout her life. The subtle microaggressions, the dismissive attitudes, even occasional verbal abuse, but never had someone physically assaulted her so deliberately, so publicly. "We have some clothes in our emergency kit," Darlene continued. "They're not fancy, just basic sweatpants and a t-shirt, but they're clean and dry." "Thank you." Amara finally spoke, her voice steadier than she expected. "What about my portfolio? My interview materials?" Darlene's expression softened with sympathy. "Marcus is trying to salvage what he can. We have a hairdryer that might help with some of the pages." As Amara changed into the offered clothes, her thoughts raced. The interview she had prepared so meticulously for was tomorrow morning. Her carefully selected outfit was ruined. Her portfolio, containing samples of her best work and detailed notes, was soaked in coffee. But something else was rising within her, something stronger than despair. "I need a minute," she told Darlene. "Then I'd like to return to the cabin." "Are you sure?" Darlene asked. "We can arrange for you to stay here until we land in Philadelphia. No one would blame you." "I'm sure," Amara replied, meeting her own gaze in the small mirror. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind. "You stand tall. Your voice matters just as much as anyone else's." When Amara emerged from the lavatory, the cabin had transformed. Richard Whitman had been moved to a seat in the last row of first class, where he sat flanked by Marcus and another male flight attendant. The captain had made an announcement about the emergency landing in Philadelphia, where authorities would be boarding the aircraft. As Amara walked down the aisle toward her original seat, a strange hush fell over the cabin. Every eye was on her, some curious, others sympathetic, a few uncomfortable. She could feel the weight of their collective gaze, the unspoken question of how she would react. Her seat had been cleaned as best as possible, though coffee stains remained visible on the upholstery. Her damaged portfolio lay on the seat, some pages clearly beyond salvaging. Taking a deep breath, Amara collected the portfolio and then turned to face the cabin. For a moment, she stood silently, taking in the scene. Then, with deliberate calmness, she spoke. Not just to Richard, but to everyone present. "I want to address what happened here today," she began, her voice clear and unwavering. "Mr. Whitman deliberately poured hot coffee on me because I refused to show him my private journal. He assumed I was writing about him, that I was somehow targeting him, when in reality, I was simply preparing for a job interview." She paused, making brief eye contact with various passengers. "What happened to me today is not new. It's not unique. It's something people who look like me experience regularly, though perhaps not always in such a dramatic fashion or with so many witnesses." From the back of the cabin, Richard's voice rang out. "This is ridiculous. It was an accident. She's playing the victim again." Amara didn't turn toward him. Instead, she continued, her voice growing stronger. "I could respond with anger. I would be justified in doing so. But anger is not what changes hearts or opens minds. So instead, I want to say this. Mr. Whitman, I forgive you." A collective gasp rippled through the cabin. Even Richard fell momentarily silent. "I forgive you not because what you did was acceptable. It wasn't. I forgive you because carrying hatred only weighs down the carrier. My grandmother lived through Jim Crow. My mother marched for civil rights. They taught me that dignity cannot be taken from you unless you surrender it." Amara's gaze swept across the cabin, meeting the eyes of passengers who had silently witnessed the entire incident without intervention. But I also want to address everyone else on this flight. Your silence in the face of injustice is a choice. When you see someone being mistreated and say nothing, you are not neutral. You are complicit. This isn't about politics or taking sides. It's about basic human decency. Several passengers lowered their eyes, the truth of her words hitting home. To those of you who eventually spoke up, or who are recording this incident, thank you. Documentation matters. Truth matters. And to the flight crew who intervened, thank you for doing your jobs with professionalism and care. Taylor Reynolds, the teenager who had captured everything on video, gave Amara a subtle thumbs up from her seat. Tomorrow, I have an interview for a position covering social justice issues at a major media outlet. Mr. Whitman may have ruined my clothes and damaged my portfolio, but he has inadvertently given me something far more valuable, a first-hand reminder of why this work matters, why these stories need to be told. Amara's voice remained steady, but there was an undeniable power behind her words that seemed to fill the entire aircraft. I've spent my life preparing for this moment, not just for this interview, but for this test of character. And I refuse to let hatred win. Not today. Not ever. As she finished speaking, a profound silence hung in the air. Then, from somewhere in the middle of the cabin, a single person began to applaud. Others joined in, the sound swelling until nearly everyone was clapping, a spontaneous acknowledgement of her extraordinary grace under pressure. Richard's face had turned a mottled red, his expression a mixture of anger and confusion. He had clearly expected tears shouting, perhaps even for Amara to physically retaliate. Her dignified response had left him without a target for his rage. The pilot's voice came over the intercom, announcing their final descent into Philadelphia. As Amara returned to her seat, several passengers approached to offer words of support or business cards. The elderly woman who had first spoken up reached across the aisle to briefly squeeze Amara's hand. "My dear," she said softly, "I'm old enough to have seen a lot of injustice in my time. What you just did took more courage than most people show in a lifetime." From the back of the cabin, Richard continued to protest his innocence, but his voice had lost its power. The truth had been witnessed by too many people, captured on too many devices. As the plane began its descent, Amara looked out the window at the approaching city of Philadelphia. Her interview was still scheduled for tomorrow morning. Her portfolio was damaged, her carefully selected outfit ruined. But somehow she felt more prepared than ever to speak truth to power. What she didn't yet realize was that by this time tomorrow, millions of people around the world would know her name. The wheels of the aircraft touched down on the runway of Philadelphia International Airport with a jolt that seemed to punctuate the tension still lingering in the cabin. The captain's voice crackled through the intercom system. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have arrived at Philadelphia International Airport. Local time is 3:42 p.m. As previously announced, this is an unscheduled stop due to an incident on board. Airport police will be boarding the aircraft momentarily. All passengers are required to remain seated with your seatbelts fastened until authorities have completed their initial assessment." Amara sat quietly, her borrowed sweatpants and airline t-shirt, a stark contrast to the business attire worn by the other first-class passengers. Her coffee-stained clothes were sealed in a plastic bag provided by Darlene, though she doubted they could be salvaged. More concerning was her portfolio. Marcus had managed to dry several pages, but many of her carefully prepared materials were permanently stained or warped beyond recovery. True to the captain's word, within minutes of the aircraft reaching the gate, the main cabin door opened and 3 uniformed airport police officers boarded, followed by a plainclothes detective. They conferred briefly with the flight crew before making their way to where Richard Whitman sat in the last row of first class. Mr. Whitman, the detective, addressed him. "I'm Detective Lopez with the Philadelphia Airport Police. We need you to come with us to discuss an incident that occurred during this flight." Richard's face had lost some of its earlier redness, replaced by a pallid concern as the reality of his situation began to sink in. "This is completely unnecessary," he protested, though his voice lacked its previous volume and conviction. "It was an accident. Turbulence caused me to spill my coffee. This is being blown completely out of proportion." "Sir, we have multiple witness statements and video evidence suggesting otherwise," Detective Lopez replied calmly. "Please gather your belongings and come with us. We can discuss the details at our office." "Do you know who I am?" Richard attempted once more, his final card. "I'm Richard Whitman of Whitman Real Estate Development. I contribute significantly to the mayor's campaign in this city." "Sir, I'm going to ask you once more to come with us voluntarily," Detective Lopez said, her voice firmer now. "Otherwise, we will be forced to place you under arrest here on the aircraft." The fight seemed to drain from Richard's body. With a final glare toward Amara, he gathered his briefcase and allowed himself to be escorted off the plane. As he passed her seat, he muttered, "This isn't over." Amara met his gaze steadily, but said nothing. Her silence spoke volumes. After Richard had been removed from the aircraft, Detective Lopez approached Amara. "Miss Johnson, I'm Detective Lopez. We'll need a statement from you regarding what occurred today. Would you be willing to come with us to our office? It shouldn't take more than an hour or so." "Of course," Amara replied. "But I have a connecting flight to New York. I have an important job interview tomorrow morning." "We'll do our best to expedite the process," Detective Lopez assured her. "And I'll have one of my officers check on alternative flights for you." As Amara gathered her belongings, an announcement came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, for those continuing to New York LaGuardia, we apologize for this unexpected delay. Maintenance crews are currently refueling the aircraft and we expect to depart within approximately 2 hours. Those who wish to remain on board may do so, or you may deplane and reboard prior to our departure time." Several passengers began to stand, stretching after the tense flight. As Amara prepared to follow Detective Lopez off the plane, she was surprised by how many people approached her with words of support. "You handled that with incredible grace," said a businessman who had been seated a few rows ahead. "I have a daughter your age," another woman told her, pressing a business card into her hand. "I'm on the board of a non-profit that might interest you. Please call me if you need anything at all." Most surprising was when Taylor Reynolds, the teenager who had been recording, stepped forward. "Miss Johnson, I'm Taylor. I got everything on video from when he first started harassing you until, well, everything. It's really clear what happened. I've already sent it to the police, but I wanted you to have it too." She held out her phone, showing Amara the video she had recorded. The footage was remarkably steady and captured the entire incident, including Richard deliberately pouring the coffee and Amara's powerful response afterward. "Thank you, Taylor," Amara said, genuinely moved. "This means a lot. Would it be okay if I sent this to you? And, I'm studying journalism in high school. The way you spoke up was really inspiring." Amara smiled, for perhaps the first time since the incident began. "Of course. Here's my email." As they exchanged contact information, Darlene approached with a garment bag. "Miss Johnson, the airline would like to provide you with this. It's not much, just some basics from our lost and found that have been cleaned and never claimed. There's a blouse and skirt that might work for your interview." Amara accepted the bag gratefully, then noticed her phone buzzing continuously in her pocket. When she checked it, she found dozens of notifications. Messages from Isaiah, who had somehow already heard about the incident. "What's happening? Are you okay? Something about coffee on a plane is trending locally. Is that you?" Before she could respond, Detective Lopez gently guided her toward the exit. "We should get your statement while everything is still fresh in your memory." As Amara followed the detective off the plane, she glanced back at the cabin that had been the setting for such an unexpected and pivotal moment in her life. The faces of the other passengers watched her go, some apologetic, others admiring, a few still processing what they had witnessed. In the terminal, airline representatives were waiting. A woman in a crisp Delta uniform stepped forward. "Miss Johnson, I'm Veronica Davis, Customer Service Director for Delta at Philadelphia International. On behalf of the airline, I want to express our deepest apologies for what you experienced today. We have a private room where you can rest while giving your statement to the police, and we're arranging first-class passage to New York on our next available flight." "Thank you," Amara replied, still somewhat dazed by how quickly events were unfolding. Additionally, Veronica continued, "We've been in contact with our partners at the Marriott in Manhattan. They'll be upgrading your accommodation to a suite for your stay, and we've arranged for a professional outfit to be delivered to your room this evening for your interview." Amara blinked in surprise. "That's incredibly generous. Thank you." As she was led to the private room, her phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't Isaiah, but a notification from a news app she subscribed to. "Breaking video of racist assault on commercial flight goes viral. Victim's powerful response captivates internet." Amara stared at the headline, a surreal feeling washing over her. Somehow, in the short time since they had landed, the incident had already begun spreading online. What she didn't know yet was that Taylor's video had been uploaded to social media by one of the teenager's friends, and it was spreading with unprecedented speed across multiple platforms. In the quiet of the private room, as she waited to give her statement, Amara tried to process everything that had happened. Her interview was still scheduled for tomorrow. Her portfolio was damaged. Her carefully planned journey had been derailed in the most unexpected way. Yet somehow, despite everything she felt, a strange sense of readiness. The voice that had risen within her on that plane, clear, dignified, unwavering, was the same voice she had been cultivating throughout her life and education. It was the voice she hoped to use in her journalism career, speaking truth to power and bringing light to injustice. What she didn't yet realize was that her career had already begun not in the interview room she had prepared so diligently for, but at 36,000 feet in a moment of crisis that had revealed her true character to the world. The New York skyline materialized through the airplane window as Delta Flight 1493 began its final descent into LaGuardia Airport. Amara Johnson sat in the first-class seat she had been upgraded to, still wearing the borrowed clothes provided by the airline. The events of the past 5 hours felt surreal. Giving her statement to Philadelphia police, the airline's profuse apologies, and the stream of notifications that continued to flood her phone. When the plane touched down and taxied to the gate, Amara switched her phone off airplane mode. Immediately, it began buzzing continuously, a cascade of texts, calls, and social media notifications. The lock screen was covered with messages from Isaiah, her mother, former classmates, and dozens of numbers she didn't recognize. "Miss Johnson," a flight attendant approached as other passengers began to deplane. "There's an airline representative waiting to escort you through the terminal. Apparently, there's quite a bit of attention at the arrival area." Confused, but too exhausted to question it, Amara followed the representative through a side door and down a service corridor, bypassing the main terminal. As they walked, the young woman explained, "The video of your incident has gone viral, Miss Johnson. There are reporters waiting in the arrivals area. We thought you might prefer a more private exit." Reporters, Amara echoed, struggling to comprehend. "For me? How did they even know I'd be on this flight?" The representative gave her a sympathetic look. "The internet works fast. Taylor's video has over 2 million views already, and people track the flight number from the seat insignias visible in the footage. Your name was identified because several passengers tagged you in their posts." They emerged near the baggage claim area, where Isaiah was waiting, pacing anxiously. When he spotted Amara, his expression shifted from worry to relief. "Amara, "Thank God you're okay." He rushed forward, pulling her into a tight hug. "What the hell happened? The whole internet is talking about you." "It's a long story," she said, the emotional and physical exhaustion finally catching up to her. "Can we just go to the hotel? I still have the interview tomorrow, and I need to try to prepare." Isaiah's eyes widened. "You don't know, do you? Check your email." Amara pulled out her phone and opened her email app. At the top of her inbox was a message from Sandra Mitchell, the executive who had scheduled her interview at Caldwell Media Group. The subject line read, "Change of plans for tomorrow's meeting." With a sinking feeling, Amara opened the email. "Miss Johnson, we become aware of the incident that occurred during your flight today. First and foremost, we want to express our concern for your well-being and extend our sympathies for what must have been a traumatic experience. In light of these events, we'd like to modify tomorrow's meeting. Rather than a standard interview, we'd like to invite you to meet with our entire senior editorial team at 10 a.m. Your composure and eloquence in the face of such a disturbing encounter has not gone unnoticed by our organization. Please confirm if this new arrangement works for you. Warm regards, Sandra Mitchell, Senior Vice President, Talent Acquisition, Caldwell Media Group." Amara stared at the screen, trying to process the implications of the message. "They've seen the video," she murmured. "Everyone has seen the video." Isaiah nodded, guiding her toward the exit where his car was parked. "It's everywhere, Amara. Number Coffee Justice and number First Class Response are trending nationally. You're the top story on every news site." As they drove to the hotel, Isaiah filled her in on how quickly the story had spread. Taylor's video had been shared by a prominent civil rights activist with millions of followers, then picked up by major news outlets. Richard Whitman had been identified within hours, his company issuing a hurried statement looking into the allegations. Multiple airlines had publicly banned him from future flights. At the hotel, Amara found that the Marriott had indeed upgraded her to a suite. On the bed lay a garment box from a high-end department store containing a tailored black pantsuit, crisp white blouse, and leather portfolio, all compliments of the hotel management. "This is insane," she whispered, sinking onto the edge of the bed. "All I wanted was to make it to my interview and start my career. Now everyone knows me as the coffee girl." "Not the coffee girl," Isaiah corrected. "The woman who responded to hatred with dignity and eloquence. The journalist who turned an assault into a teachable moment. You're already doing exactly what you told me you wanted to do, using your voice to highlight injustice." Amara's phone rang again, her mother calling for the third time. This time she answered. Baby girl Clara Johnson's voice was thick with emotion. "I just saw the video. Are you all right?" "I'm okay, Mom," Amara assured her, fighting back tears at the sound of her mother's voice. "It was scary in the moment, but I'm safe now." "You stood tall," Clara said, pride evident in her voice. "Just like I always knew you would. Your grandma is in heaven right now telling everyone, that's my grandbaby." After promising to call her mother with updates, Amara ended the call and turned to Isaiah. "I should prepare for tomorrow. Everything's different now." "You don't need to prepare," Isaiah told her, gesturing to her phone, which was still buzzing with notifications. "You already showed them exactly who you are and what you stand for. But if you want to review the major coverage, I can help." They spent the next hour going through news articles and social media posts about the incident. The coverage was overwhelmingly supportive of Amara, with commentators praising her composure and eloquence. Richard Whitman was being universally condemned, with many people digging into his company's history and finding allegations of discriminatory housing practices. Amara was in the middle of reading a particularly powerful analysis when there was a knock at the door. A hotel staff member stood there with a food cart. "Complimentary dinner, Miss Johnson. The chef prepared it specially." After thanking the staff member, Amara turned to Isaiah. "I don't understand any of this. Why are strangers being so kind to me? Isaiah considered this as he helped uncover the plates of gourmet food. "I think it's because you gave voice to something many people have experienced but couldn't articulate. Or maybe it's because you showed incredible grace in a moment when no one would have blamed you for losing your temper. Either way, you've struck a chord." As they ate, Amara's phone continued to buzz with notifications. Multiple news outlets were requesting interviews. Civil rights organizations were inviting her to speak at events. A book publisher had even sent a preliminary inquiry about her interest in writing a memoir. "I can't deal with all this right now," Amara said, finally silencing her phone. "I need to focus on tomorrow's meeting." "Which isn't an interview anymore," Isaiah reminded her. "They're bringing in the senior editorial team. That never happens for entry-level positions." "What do you think it means?" Isaiah grinned. "I think it means you should get some sleep. Tomorrow's gonna be a big day." The next morning, Amara dressed in the new suit, its perfect fit, suggesting someone had obtained her measurements from the airline's records. The new portfolio contained blank pages, but she no longer needed her prepared notes. The events of the previous day had given her something far more powerful, a lived experience that demonstrated her values and abilities better than any resume ever could. When she arrived at the Caldwell Media Group building, the receptionist recognized her immediately. "Miss Johnson, they're expecting you on the 35th floor." In the elevator, Amara took deep breaths, centering herself. This wasn't the interview she had prepared for, but perhaps it was the one she had been preparing for her entire life. When the doors opened, Sandra Mitchell was waiting, a tall woman with silver-streaked hair and a warm smile. "Amara," she said, extending her hand. "Thank you for coming, especially after everything you've been through. The entire team is eager to meet you." She led Amara to a large conference room where not just 3 or 4 people waited, as would be typical for an interview, but nearly 20 executives seated around a massive table. At the head sat Gregory Caldwell himself, the founder and CEO of the media conglomerate. "Miss Johnson," he said, standing as she entered, "your handling of yesterday's incident exemplified everything our organization aspires to represent in our journalism: dignity, clarity, and speaking truth to power. We didn't invite you here today for a traditional interview." He gestured for her to take a seat at the table, not in a chair against the wall as an interviewee might, but at the table itself, as a colleague. "We'd like to discuss something entirely different. A platform for you to share your unique voice with our global audience." Amara took her seat at the table, her journey having taken a turn she could never have anticipated. As the executives began outlining their vision, she realized that sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones we live ourselves. 1 week later, Amara Johnson sat in the green room of the Today Show listening to the producers explain the segment format. Her new publicist, provided by Caldwell Media Group, where she was now employed as a special correspondent focusing on social justice issues, reviewed talking points with her one last time. "Remember, stay authentic," Jennifer Adams advised, straightening Amara's collar. That's what resonated with people in the first place. The past 7 days had been a whirlwind. After meeting with the editorial team at Caldwell, Amara had been offered not the entry-level position she'd applied for, but a featured role reporting on discrimination and social justice across multiple platforms. Her first assignment was, in some ways, to tell her own story, but also to use it as a lens to examine the broader issues of racism in America. 3 minutes to air. Miss Johnson, a production assistant, called, poking his head into the green room. Amara nodded, taking a deep breath. On the monitor, she could see the show's hosts introducing the segment with Taylor's video playing in a box beside them. The footage had now been viewed over 50 million times across various platforms. Joining us this morning is Amara Johnson, whose powerful response to a racist incident on a commercial flight has sparked a national conversation about discrimination and allyship, the host was saying. Amara is now a special correspondent for Caldwell Media Group, focusing on social justice reporting. As Amara walked onto the set, the studio audience applauded warmly. She took her seat, smiling as the hosts welcomed her.
Amara, thank you so much for being here. I think what everyone wants to know is, how are you doing after such a public and traumatic experience?
I'm still processing it, Amara answered honestly. What happened to me on that flight was upsetting, but unfortunately, not unique. What has been extraordinary is the response, not just to the incident itself, but to the conversation it started. Your response in that moment has been described as remarkably composed and eloquent. How were you able to maintain such dignity in the face of such a blatant attack? Amara considered the question carefully. I think about my mother and grandmother and the generations of Black women who came before me who faced far worse with grace and strength. In that moment, I felt their presence with me. And I knew that responding with anger while justified wouldn't advance the conversation we need to be having in this country. The interview continued touching on the aftermath of the incident. Richard Whitman had been charged with assault and had stepped down temporarily from his position while his company underwent an internal review of its practices. The airline had implemented new anti-discrimination training for all staff, using Taylor's video with permission and appropriate compensation as a training tool. What's been most surprising to you about how this story is developed? The host asked. The allies who have emerged, Amara replied, without hesitation. 2 business-class passengers who witnessed the incident have since formed an organization called Speak Up, encouraging bystanders to intervene safely when they witness discrimination. It's already gained over 20,000 members. What Amara didn't mention was the flood of donations that had poured in after a supporter set up a GoFundMe to help with her expenses. When the total surpassed $50,000, Amara had announced the creation of the First Class Response Scholarship, supporting journalism students from underrepresented backgrounds. After the interview concluded, Amara checked her phone to find messages from both Darlene and Marcus, the flight attendants who had helped her during the incident. Both had been invited to participate in the airline's new training program, turning a terrible experience into an opportunity for systemic improvement. There was also a message from Taylor Reynolds, the teenager whose video had started it all. The young aspiring journalist had accepted Amara's offer to intern with her during summer break, turning what could have been just another viral moment into a meaningful mentorship. Back at the Caldwell offices, Amara found herself in a strange position. While she was grateful for the platform and opportunities that had suddenly been presented to her, she was determined not to be defined solely by the incident. In meetings with producers and editors, she advocated for stories that highlighted similar but unfilmed incidents faced by others. My story went viral because it was captured on video in a confined space where witnesses couldn't look away, she explained during an editorial meeting. But these interactions happen every day without cameras present. Her first major piece focused on racial discrimination in transportation, not just on airlines, but in ride-sharing services, public transit, and even the simple act of hailing a cab while Black. The response was overwhelming, with thousands sharing their own experiences through a dedicated hashtag Amara had created. One evening, as she worked late in her new office, Sandra Mitchell knocked on her door. Burning the midnight oil? Already, the executive asked with a smile. You've only been here a week. Just finishing research for the transportation piece, Amara replied. The responses we've gotten are incredible. So many people have been waiting for permission to tell their stories. Sandra nodded, taking a seat across from Amara. That's the power of what you did on that plane. You showed people it's possible to respond to hatred with dignity and still be heard. Maybe even be heard more clearly because of it. I worry sometimes, Amara admitted, about being seen only as the coffee incident girl, about whether I'd be sitting in this office if that hadn't happened. Let me tell you something, Sandra said, leaning forward. Your application was already in our strong potential pile before any of this happened. Your coverage of voter suppression in Georgia was exceptional. Would you have started at this level? No, but you would have been here eventually. Amara felt a weight lift slightly at Sandra's words. What's remarkable isn't that you ended up here, Sandra continued. It's how you've used this unexpected platform. Many people would have been content to ride the viral wave, do the talk show circuit, maybe write a quick memoir, and fade back into obscurity. Instead, you immediately turned the spotlight away from yourself and toward the larger issues. That's why we wanted you. After Sandra left, Amara remained at her desk contemplating the strange path that had led her here. On her computer screen was an email she had been debating whether to open. A message from Richard Whitman's attorney requesting a private meeting. According to sources at Whitman Real Estate Development, the company was hemorrhaging clients and facing multiple investigations into discriminatory practices. Richard himself had checked into a residential treatment program for anger management and addiction issues his attorney claimed and wanted to make amends. Amara stared at the email, uncertain how to respond. Part of her wanted nothing to do with the man who had assaulted her. Another part wondered if this might be an opportunity to create one more ripple of positive change from the incident. As she considered her options, her phone rang, her mother calling for their nightly check-in. "How's my famous daughter tonight?" Clara Johnson asked, her voice warm with pride. "Tired," Amara admitted, "but good, working on a story that matters." "That's all you ever wanted, isn't it? A chance to tell stories that matter." "Yes," Amara said softly, looking around her office with its view of the Manhattan skyline, "though I never imagined it would happen like this." "Life rarely follows our plans," her mother replied wisely, "but it always follows our character." After their call, Amara turned back to her computer and opened Richard Whitman's attorney's email. Whatever happened next, she would face it the same way she had faced that moment on the plane, with dignity, purpose, and an unwavering commitment to justice. 6 months after coffee splashed across her lap at 36000 feet, Amara Johnson sat in a different kind of airplane seat, this time in a television studio meticulously designed to resemble a first-class cabin. Across from her, looking markedly different from their last encounter, sat Richard Whitman. "Welcome to First Class Conversations with Amara Johnson," she addressed the camera with practiced ease. "Today marks a special episode of our program. For the past 6 months, we've been exploring instances of discrimination in everyday America and highlighting the voices of those affected. Today, we're doing something different." She turned to Richard, whose once imposing presence had been tempered by the events of the past half year. The arrogance that had radiated from him on that fateful flight had been replaced by a wary humility. "Mr. Whitman has agreed to join us today, not for a confrontation or public shaming, but for something more challenging, an honest conversation about transformation." Richard nodded slightly, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "For those who may not be familiar with our shared history," Amara continued, 6 months ago, "Mr. Whitman deliberately poured hot coffee on me during a commercial flight after a series of escalating racist behaviors. That incident, captured on video, sparked a national conversation about racism and accountability. Today, we're here to discuss what happened after the cameras stopped rolling." The studio lights seemed to intensify as Amara turned fully toward Richard. "Mr. Whitman, thank you for being here. I understand this wasn't an easy decision." "No," he agreed, his voice quieter than she remembered. "But it's a necessary one. Let's start with the question many people are asking. Why did you agree to appear here today?" Richard took a deep breath. "The simple answer is that I owe you this, at minimum. The more complicated answer is that I've spent 6 months in intensive therapy examining the beliefs and behaviors that led to that moment. My counselor suggested that real accountability includes facing the person I harmed. "And do you believe you've changed?" Amara asked directly. "I believe I'm changing," he corrected carefully. "This isn't a transformation with a neat beginning and end. It's ongoing work." The conversation continued with Richard detailing his time in an addiction and anger management program where therapists had helped him confront not just his alcohol dependency, but the deeply rooted racist beliefs he had never examined. He described the loss of his company, his reputation, and many of his relationships. Many viewers might see those consequences as Justice Amara observed. Do you? "I see them as necessary," Richard replied. "Not punishment, but natural outcomes of my behavior. What I did to you was assault motivated by racial hatred. The legal consequences could have been much more severe. The fact that I'm here talking to you instead of serving jail time is frankly another example of privilege." Behind the cameras, producers exchanged surprised glances. Richard's prepared talking points had emphasized his personal journey and rehabilitation, not an acknowledgement of privilege. Amara nodded thoughtfully. "Let's talk about your company. Whitman Real Estate Development is now under new leadership and has instituted major policy changes, including an affordable housing initiative in communities your previous developments had displaced. Was that your decision?" "Partially," Richard admitted. "After stepping down, I remained the majority shareholder. The board wanted to sell the company and distribute assets, but I saw an opportunity to transform the harm we had caused into something positive. It doesn't erase the past, but it's a step toward repair." The interview continued delving into Richard's ongoing education about systemic racism and the surprising allies he had found in his recovery journey, including Marcus Cooper, the flight attendant who had escorted him off the plane, who now consulted for Whitman's new community engagement division. Throughout the conversation, Amara maintained her composure, asking challenging questions without anger or retribution. For viewers, the contrast between this measured exchange and the viral video of 6 months ago created a powerful narrative arc. Near the end of the segment, Amara shifted the conversation. "Many people have asked me if I've forgiven you. On the plane in the immediate aftermath, I said I did. But forgiveness isn't a one-time declaration. It's a process. Where do you think we stand in that process?" Richard considered the question carefully. "I don't think it's my place to assess your forgiveness. What I can say is that I'm grateful for this opportunity to speak with you, and I recognize it as an undeserved kindness on your part." "Not undeserved," Amara corrected. "Earned through the work you've described today." And that brings me to my final question. What happens after this interview ends? How do you continue this transformation when the cameras are off and public attention has moved on? "By remembering that this was never about the cameras," Richard replied. "Real change happens in private moments, in how I speak about others when they're not present, in the assumptions I make about people I encounter, in the policies I support with my vote and my wallet." The incident between us was public, but the work of transformation is deeply personal. As the segment concluded, Amara turned to the camera. What began as a moment of hatred at 3,600 feet has evolved into something neither Mr. Whitman nor I could have predicted: a journey of accountability, education, and change. While individual transformation is powerful, it must be accompanied by systemic change. She gestured to the studio backdrop behind them. The airline involved in our incident has completely revamped its training procedures. Darlene Williams and Marcus Cooper, the flight attendants who intervened that day, now lead workshops for crew members on handling discrimination on board. Taylor Reynolds, the teenager who recorded the video, is completing her first year of journalism school on a scholarship created from donations that poured in after our story went viral. The camera pulled back to reveal a wider shot of the set, where Darlene, Marcus, and Taylor now joined them. These are the ripple effects of one incident. One moment when hate was met, not with more hate, but with dignity and a demand for justice. Imagine what might be possible if we approached every such moment with the same intention. As the credits began to roll, the studio audience rose in applause. Backstage, Amara's mother waited with tears in her eyes. They had spoken at length about this interview and what it might mean to publicly engage with Richard. Clara had shared her wisdom about the power of visible forgiveness, not as a gift to the offender, but as liberation for oneself. Later that evening, as reactions to the interview flooded social media, Amara sat in her apartment with Isaiah, who had been promoted to producer on her show. So he asked, "How do you feel about it?" Amara considered the question. Complicated. Some people will think I was too soft on him. Others will see it as a powerful example of reconciliation. The truth is somewhere in between. Like most things in life, Isaiah observed. Exactly. 6 months ago, I was spending my last dollars on a flight to an interview I was terrified of not getting. Today, I'm hosting my own segment on a major network. Life can change in an instant. Sometimes because of terrible things, sometimes because of wonderful ones, but most often because of how we respond to whatever comes our way. Her phone buzzed with a message from Taylor sharing the viewer numbers for the interview, already surpassing 1 million streams on various platforms. "You know what I realized today," Amara said, setting down her phone. "When I was in college studying journalism, I wanted to tell other people's stories. I never imagined becoming part of the story myself. But now I understand. The best reporters don't just tell stories from a distance. They recognize how they're connected to the larger narratives around them." The next morning, Amara arrived at the studio early. On her desk was a stack of letters, handwritten notes from viewers who had been touched by her journey. As she read through them, a production assistant knocked on her door. "Sorry to interrupt, Miss Johnson, but your next interview subject is here early. Should I tell her to wait?" Amara shook her head, setting aside the letters. "No, send her in." As the woman entered, a schoolteacher from Detroit who had experienced similar discrimination on a bus, Amara stood to welcome her, no longer defined by being a victim of that coffee incident, but recognized for her strength, wisdom, and leadership in advancing the conversation on racial justice in America. What do you think about Amara's decision to interview Richard Whitman 6 months after the incident? Was forgiveness the right choice? Or should she have maintained her distance? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched you, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more powerful real-life stories that matter. Share this video with someone you think needs to hear Amara's message of dignity and transformation. Thank you for watching. And remember, how we respond to life's challenges defines us far more than the challenges themselves. Amara's journey teaches us that our response to injustice can transform personal suffering into powerful change. Her story demonstrates that prejudice still exists in everyday spaces, but also shows how one person's composed response can inspire widespread accountability. The ripple effects from airline policy changes to Richard's personal transformation remind us that systemic change often begins with individual courage. Bystander intervention proves crucial. Taylor's decision to document the incident created irrefutable evidence that made denial impossible. Meanwhile, the initial silence of other passengers highlights how complicity perpetuates discrimination. Perhaps most powerfully, Amara refused to be defined by victimhood, instead channeling her experience into a platform that amplifies other voices. Her willingness to engage with her abuser 6 months later reveals that transformation requires both accountability and forgiveness, not as an absolution of wrongdoing, but as a pathway to healing that benefits everyone involved. What moment in your life taught you about standing up to injustice? Have you ever witnessed discrimination and regretted staying silent? Share your experiences in the comments below. If Amara's strength resonated with you, hit that subscribe button to join our community of people committed to positive change through storytelling. This video deserves to reach those who need its message. So please like and share it with someone who could benefit from seeing how dignity can triumph over hatred. Thank you for watching, and remember, our response to life's challenges shapes not just our personal journey, but the world around us.